Yeah. Good afternoon. My name is Gopinath. I'm from Indian Institute of Science. I teach computer science there. So, again, thanks to Rajiv, Malhotra, and Prof. Kannan and other people for giving an opportunity to talk about this topic. Luckily, I think the previous speaker and what I'm going to speak about is not much. I think you covered different aspects of it, and the color is slightly different. I'm just reacting to what I understand of the paper. So I think it is of a different flavor. I think basically when I look at this work, to me it looks as though there are certain questions are posed and some extraneous elements are brought in and some evidence is marshaled and you get certain kinds of conclusions. To me this reminds me of a propaganda system in operation. And I find that that's the best way to understand it, but otherwise I just can't make sense of it. It looks a bit simplistic, but that's the best I can do to understand. For example, let's take the context, 1992. I think there was an interesting book published, The American Holocaust by David Stannard, and it shows the connection between American Holocaust, the Nazi Holocaust, and the church. And the people who are, the numbers of people dead are in the region of 100 millions. And surprisingly, there is no obvious entity responsible for this in standard accounts till about 3 to 4 decades back. List of all the church of the Western powers. Columbus is placed as a discoverer. And only in 1992, surprisingly, the first time, the Native Americans take a public stand saying that we will not celebrate Columbus Day. Again, around the same time, there are other things happening in India also. 86 to 92, we have all this Shah Bano, the breaking of the let's say locks on the temple in Ayodhya. The Shilanyas movement has started, and the demolition happens in 92. The number of deaths are about people are killed about hundreds, and but compared to this one, if you look at this one, almost nobody is responsible. But here it is fairly clear who is responsible. And about 93, Pollock writes a paper on deep Orientalism, etc. And this is actually part of some seminar series in 88. So you can see that there's no direct connection, but at the same time it's happening around the same time. And Pollock actually does some job of equating the two things in some way. And basically, my understanding is that the sense what is going to be coming. Some people are going to study all these things and come out with these kind of things. And there is some kind of a preemptive strike, you might say. Right? So for people like Pollock who are sensitive, and they know that actually Nazi Holocaust could be framed this way. So they're trying to figure out how to hit back ahead of time. I think that's the best I can also think about. Right? So look for Nazi Holocaust precursors elsewhere, or it's part of a dominant narrative. Essentially, it's a part of a propaganda system. Again, I don't want to go into too much detail about this. If you look at this, book, he talks about what it was like before 1492. Then he talks about what happened, the path of genocide from Mexico to Central and South America, then Florida, Virginia, etc. And then he says typically 90% of the populations died. And he says, how did this happen? And his sole answer is that it happened because of Christians. And he basically says, digging deeply into ancient European Christian identity, sex, race, war, cultural ground well prepared by the end of the Middle Ages for centuries-long genocide campaigns. Okay? And of course, this is all happening to Indic systems, I think all of us know this. So in a sense, also Stannard contends that the perpetrators of American Holocaust drew on the same ideological wellspring as the later Anti-Nazi Holocaust. That's what he concludes. Again, for me, the more interesting thing was, is there an immediate precursor for this? Again, the previous speaker also pointed this out. If you look at Namibia, it turned out in the 1840s, some missionary society was established. In 1884, Bismarck's Berlin Conference allowed spheres of influence in Africa. And it turns out Germany becomes the third largest area that they have control over after Britain and France. There is this tribals, the tribes Holocaust and Namas in Namibia, and there's competition between 85 to 1904 for land, capital. There are some battles and realignments between three forces, Holocaust, Namas and Germans. The Germans as usual break treaties, steal land, abuse native. And surprisingly, Heinrich Göring, who is the father of the Nazi leader to be coming, happens to be the Imperial Commissioner of Southwest Africa. Okay? And there was some connection between this crowd, where the Heroes and Namas, they were in antagonism sometimes, they were in league with Germans sometimes. But finally, the Heroes and Namas realized that the Germans are the bigger enemy. So finally, there was a major rebellion by the Heroes, aided by Namas, and this General von Trotha, he explicitly formulated a policy of extermination, murder, dehydration, poisoning, etc. Not just that, they went to the extent of doing medical experiments on dying patients, etc. So, what is interesting also for us is that this concept of concentration camps actually started getting serious currency around this time, but actually it was picked up from the British, because the British people also had this camps of Boers and Africans. So, again, to go further, it turned out there were more interesting developments also. It turns out that there was an anthropologist by the name of Fisher who actually conducted experiments on African victims of Hero War, including body parts and all the people who were dead. There was an organized export of the skulls to Germany. And I've read somewhere that a lot of medical understanding about various diseases and how to cure them actually happened because of Germans actually did the experiments on African victims. That's what I read. So again, this same person wrote a book on principle of heredity, which was read by Hitler in prison. And ideas are used in Mein Kampf. Actually, briefly glossed over Mein Kampf as part of this preparation for this particular talk. And this same person became the director of Institute of Anthropology. He teaches racial hygiene to SS doctors, how to guard purity of race. He conducts experiments on racially mixed children in Rhine, basically French and German mixed children. And his protege student, Mengele, he does experiments on Jewish and Roma twins and dwarfs. Okay, this is in the 1940s. And the same person actually became appointed as an honorary professor of anthropology after due denazification. And 85, the UN report declares Herodotus genocide the first in 20th century. And what I'm trying to suggest is that this understanding about how to conduct genocides actually happened through, not so obviously from Sanskrit, it happened more directly through some means. And 1990, Namibia independent, and I think I was a student at the time, and I used to hear about the US student professors in 80s about South Africa and the SNAPO and all these things. Okay? And so any sensitive scholar would have understood what was going on here, but what is shocking to me and surprising to me is a deep scholar like Pollock has no mention of any of these things. Okay? That's what surprises me. So again, in 2004, Germany's ambassador to Namibia apologized, but no reparations. Still today, there's no reparations. With respect to Jewish people, they have done the reparations, but with respect to Namibia, they stonewalled it completely. Again, this is summarized on some particular reference. So if I look back upon it, there are two good explanations for the genesis of Nazi genocide: church and persecution of Jews, and European role in genocide. But for Pollock, this is too pedestrian. It's too obvious or whatever it is. So instead, what he does is try to get evidence of Sanskrit is complicit. So basically, uncritically assume that a thesis is supported by use of words like Aryan or symbols for swastika. But if you think about it, all these symbols are used to denote power relations or linguistic facts rather than, for example, good context with Aryans or auspiciousness with respect to swastika. And also it turns out many German Indologists were Nazi sympathizers, but that also was true for many German scientists also. It's not really necessary to assume that just because German Indologists were Nazi sympathizers that German Indology actually caused it to happen. Okay, it could be because of the whole society was like that, precisely because this unequal treaty of Versailles and hyperinflation, financial cartel run by US, Britain, France, there was all kinds of real serious problems were there at that time. And so there was serious social disorder in minority. So the fact that many people were Nazi sympathizers is not surprising. Okay? The fact that German Indologists were also Nazi sympathizers is not very surprising. Okay? So basically, in a sense, I would suggest that there's some dubious argumentation going on. And briefly to talk about the argument in the paper, first of all, it expands the scope of Orientalism broadly and makes it equivalent to any system of domination and oppression. Then it takes examples of inequality in Indian society in the past, and now it makes it also some type of expanded notion of Orientalism because of inequality exists. Now there is some continuity between internal Orientalism and other types of Orientalisms. Again, now it brings in the fact that German Indology had lots of support with Nazi sympathizers. And then, because of that, and because of the caste system, he conflicts with racism, and therefore Nazis were only continuing what Indians were doing all around. I mean, there's some kind of a fairly complex and slightly non-trivial reasoning that goes behind, but if you think carefully, this is what is good. Okay? And because of the resilience of the Sanskrit knowledge systems for more than 2 million years, there was something in Sanskrit, okay? Deep structure of order, domination, oppression, that makes internal Orientalism and the German Nazi variety possible. So, and therefore, Germans, because they studied the Sanskrit knowledge system intensely, they became infected with this matter of structure and order, domination, oppression became hallmarks of Nazis. Okay? So, in a sense, Sanskrit knowledge systems molded the Nazis into certain types of murderous machines. Okay? That I think is basically what I understand about this argument. Okay? But if you think a bit more, I think you can see that there is some other lots of interesting ideas. For example, Rolf Hilberg, he talks about the destruction of European Jews, and he talks about how there were many canonical laws of the church, at least about 22 of them, and it turns out that the canonical laws of the church are very similar to what the Nazis promulgated. For example, in 306C, Jews and Christians now permitted to be the sign of India. Jews barred from dining cards. This is the Nazi version. This is the 306 version. Prohibition of intermarriage and of sexual intercourse between Christians and Jews. This is in 306. This is for law of protection of German blood and honor. This is the Nazi version. Jews not permitted to show themselves in streets during Fashion Week. Decree authorizing local authorities to bar Jews from the streets and sidewalks. And basically, this particular book talks about this startling similarities between whatever those guys did and what this guy did. And what is shocking also to me is that he oftentimes introduces some other non-relevant things into the picture to bring some dubious conclusion. For example, something about National Socialist capturing power, but he says that it was what they were doing was classically codified. Now, where is this coming from? I don't know. Okay?
You also
No, what is interesting is that I can actually say it came from the Simons, okay? Because Hilberg actually is historically attested that this would happen. Okay? But he actually says classically, actually we can argue the opposite way, because we have untouchability in our country, unfortunately. So, when discussing untouchability with restriction of shaving food, we can as well say this is synodic, okay? Because they also say that Jews and Christians were also not to share food. Okay? They also say that. Okay? We can as well say synodically it was happening in this country. So again, our problem also is that a theory is a matching. Okay? He says, reviewing Indology in the way we have just done, we encounter a field of knowledge of history and object, both having permeated its power. But surprisingly, he doesn't, if anybody were to make such a strong statement, he will at least compare other situations also. He doesn't do that. For example, he doesn't look at whether other societies were also having this kind of problems, for example, slaving societies or multiple genocides in Europeans or large libraries of Alexandria are now burned or some of palaces were burned in Beijing. So none of this is considered, and he puts it out as a, I would say that some kind of theorizing and matching, just look at your own stuff and keep deriving all kinds of things from there. Again, I'm not sure, I'm running out of time, but I'll just quickly, and he has also some interesting wordplay. He talks about Sanskrit orthogenetic nature. Basically, orthogenesis means that the property of an inflexible internal structure that manifests itself in any environment. You take the stuff, put it here, it starts behaving exactly the same way. Put it here, it also behaves the same way. Okay? So he claims that Sanskrit has this property, and therefore, in the hands of Germans, it was no surprise that that same structure also sprang up. Again, I don't have time to go through this, but there's a lot of very interesting, dense English stuff. I don't think I have time to go through it. Basically, if you look at if you look at the style, there are a lot of jumps of logic and rhetoric. For example, give one example, principal target of Orientalistic critique in South Asia, intimate and often complicated ties, sometimes crudely heavy. So you don't know whether it is intimate, it's complicated, but sometimes crudely heavy linked. You don't know what is it really talking about. Yeah. So sometimes, so in a sense, anything goes and can be selectively used later for preformed ideas that need to be concluded. Okay? Ignore whatever is convenient, inconvenient. For example, it starts with the following. The various forms of cultural and spiritual learning represented by missionary knowledge do not require special commentary. And then it goes on to talk about something else. In a sense, what you can do is you can obfuscate, trivialize the relevant aspects, and concentrate on secondary features. Okay? So it does that systematically. Okay? Sometimes it sounds intimidating because sometimes it uses words which we don't know what it is. For example, I don't know how to pronounce this word. I'm sorry, I'm ignorant of these things. Some of you know it. So, to me, it looks like a needless German word just to show that he knows something. So basically, for me, what I think is that when I think about this, it looks like a propaganda function. Implicit support to what Rajiv Malhotra calls as Western universalism, whitewashed European genocides, and explicit demonization of Indic system. There are two parts to this. So basically, if it's an obvious truth that has to be made to recede in the background, the only way to do it is non-issues have to be, the cloud one's thinking has to be put in front, carefully nurtured, and repeated by others. Okay? Once you do it, then on a few decades it becomes center stage. Okay? So for example, Modi's demonization, I think, is a good recent example. And Madhukrishna has done a great job of writing about it. And I felt that some of the previous thinkers like Herman and Chomsky, they did a good job of analyzing intellectuals and media role in propaganda systems. I should admit that Chomsky's idea about Indian political system I'm not sure I agree with. But I think that his analysis is quite interesting. So I briefly spent a few more minutes talking about this. So if you look at Herman Chomsky's model, he talks about societal purpose is to serve the agenda of privileged groups. But the study of media institutions and how they function will be scrupulously ignored, apart from the fringe elements are relatively obscure scholarly literature. The theory, this model postulates 5 classes of features. Who owns the medium? Who is funding it? How is it sourcing? Means how does it from that particular medium, where does it go? How does it source other things? Who are the flak enforcers? Flak means some action from the periphery who sort of straightens out the path in sense. Okay? And the other things like anti-communism, fear ideology. Of course, in our case, they have to replace something else. Okay? So these elements interact with and reinforce each other. The raw material of news must pass through successive filters, leaving only the clean residue fit to be taught. Okay? So this is briefly the model. And he uses it to explain, for example, the American intervention in Vietnam, how the press was there in the US, for example, the New York Times and all. He explains it. So for me, the interesting thing is that we have some kind of a propaganda system in operation for the last, I don't know, at least 50 to 100 years now. So, for example, when it comes to ownership, the faculty positions are owned by certain entities. The Nehruvian government India bodies, they own certain things in the recent past. I think some of the lists which Rajiv has fought against in these are funding sources, US academic system, US corporate social responsibility. Google actually sent about $11 million to World Vision, which is a Christian funding agency. So Indian corporate funders, Church Islamic funds, etc. But at the same time, there are no funds for Indic study in India, or it is there in very minor quantities. So the sourcing aspect is the PhDs that are produced, the tech reports are produced, news outlets, books. A good example also is that there is one author by the name of Mark Singleton. He talks about Western origins of Istanbul. And basically this is the kind of stuff that keeps on coming out, and we are left only reacting to it. Okay? So flak enforcers, gatekeepers, so that anyone daring to support Indic systems has to pay serious cost. Again, the theory ideologies about throwing all this word like RSS, fascism, human rights violation, and again recently Rajiv has written a book on academic Hinduphobia. All these things are also contributing. So I briefly will close in a few minutes. So basically what we have is that we have a reality of disinformation, digestion, defamation, Gopinath, etc. So we can have heavy-handed approaches to doing these kind of things, pass anti-defamation, anti-hate laws, like anti-do, etc. But these are problematic. Okay? Getting support in this list also is really difficult because we have all this breaking India for so long. can try to use existing laws like what was used by Batra. That also seems to be a problematic thing because it interferes with sincere and insincere discussions. There are also possibilities of using new IPR laws. For example, there are laws on moral rights. For example, the part concerning right to the integrity of work. For example, you cannot take somebody's work and mistranslate it. The author can go after you. So our problem is that our texts, for example, Gita, are many centuries old and they are in public domain and with no tangible author, so it's not easy to. I'm not sure about this, but I think we'll see that there is some progress in this area. If you look at geographical indicators, you can't mislabel things. If you mislabel things, the trips, etc., there is some WTO rules are there which will take care of it. So mislabeling is not possible in some of the areas, but we have to figure out how to avoid mislabeling in our area. So Rajiv also has talked about poison pills. Basically, just like in copyleft and software, we have interesting ideas. And the only problem for us is that these things do not provide or protect the societal replication mechanisms for survival, because replication is happening through propaganda or the opposite, the attenuation, the criticism. So the thing is, how do we actually enforce this kind of policy? So essentially, we have to look at where does criticism start and propaganda start again. And I'm wondering if essentially we need to understand who can speak or provide critical perspective in indic models. And again, it looks to be somewhat similar to the notion of adhikara present in our tradition. Again, Rajiv also has talked about this in his recent books. So this requires some serious study. So I'll just end with this particular observation. To me, the Pollock's thesis seems to postulate a butterfly effect. What I mean by that is, the butterfly flapping its wings in, say, somewhere in China, but it causes a major hurricane in some other faraway place. Because there is, because you look at such heavy-duty explanations are available, he instead concentrated on something else. And sometimes this kind of thing is quite reasonable. Sometimes there are unexamined aspects. But in this case, at least, I think historically so much is available. As somebody, I think you mentioned, so much has been written about it. He completely ignores it and concentrates on something else. And that seems to be strange. And so basically, to me, I fail to understand his work, and only way I understand it is because of propaganda systems. Further work is needed to empirically substantiate some aspects of the model, the model I mentioned about Herman and Chomsky, funding, social aspects, etc. And also the nature of flak and forces and newer media such as social media. And I think we need to study intersection of propaganda, anti-indic bias, as well as legal remedies. It's something we have to look into some of these things. And with this, I'd like to conclude. Thank you very much.